Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg. And in today's show, we have a new guest. This time this is a historian from the University of Luxembourg, the C2DH, the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about different projects and research he is involved in, as well as introduce us a little bit to the idea of public history. Today, our special guest is Professor Thomas Cauvin, who is the Associate Professor of Public History at C2DH. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Anna.
Of course, we will start with very basic, but I think also very difficult definitions. Can you tell us what public history is? I guess you were expecting that question, but this is from a layman's standpoint, something we definitely need to start with.
Sure. It's actually a question we got very often. Public history is a way of doing history that is trying to be even more public. What that means is that we try to make history more accessible. So that could be through different kind of media, podcast, for example, but also exhibitions, comics, documentary film, games, tours, you name it. So making history more accessible to non-academic audiences. So my family, my friends, your grandparents, and so on. So this is a sort of history that is accessible, which is usually jargon-free. So we, try to make history simple. The past is not simple, but the way we communicate about the past should be more simple than academic articles, for example. So making history more accessible to the public. The other major dimension is to make history more participatory. So to involve different partners, different audiences, working with inhabitants, and so on. So not only a top-down approach in which experts deliver history to the passive public, but something which is way more interactive. That could be done through oral history. You need two people, the narrator and the interviewer. So it's a participation by definition. But other aspects of doing history can be participatory. An exhibition can be participatory. A web documentary can be participatory. So, there are a lot of possible processes to involve the public into the construction of history. The last major dimension of public history is to connect past and present. So for the past and for history to be relevant in the present. Some historians are consultants for companies to build their archives, but historians can also contribute to public policy, so to have a direct impact in present-day situation. So this is the third and major aspect of doing history in a more public way.
Okay, I understand. So it's bridging the gap.
Exactly, bridging the gap between historians and non-historians, between partners, between university, museums, between a radio station and students. So bridging is actually a very good term that we use often.
And what happened that suddenly this movement developed? Because I guess I've read something about the so-called ivory tower historians that were there to tell the others how the history was, and there was no participation. And I guess somebody realized, well, we need to involve people more because we are getting too disconnected.
Well, it's always a balance. In the 19th century, there was a need of professionalization. History is based on critical methodology. You need evidence. You need a methodology. So historians have built a field, which is history as a methodology, as a discipline, with universities, with experts. But, it's a question of balance. You always go somewhere and you need to come back. So there's been this process of historians somehow disconnected from popular audiences because they were talking between each other, they would be between peers, doing very specialized work on tiny details about the past. And we need that kind of research. But there's been a trend, broader than history, broader than humanities. It's about science, it's about knowledge, a way of democratizing the production of knowledge. So citizen science, public humanities, you name it. Since the 60s, more and more people have been trying to do history not only for historians but for broader audiences and to do history with more partners. So it's not only about history. It's a bigger trend in which we try to make the process more transparent, more democratic, and more inclusive.
Absolutely, it fits in general with the whole trend of people participating, just like participating in media production and participating in different, I don't know, public policy changes and so on and so forth. So this is great that it's also going that direction. But then, how do you actually manage to understand what is a fact and what is an opinion if you include public in it? Are the historians the ones that are supposed to decide on this? Is there anybody deciding, or is it more about collecting and just letting the others who get access to that collection decide on their own?
Well, you have many different levels of participation. Not everyone wants to participate in history. Some people are not interested. Other people don't have much to tell or share. For example, you may interview someone who was a witness of the Second World War. Other people, born in the 1980s, would have much less to talk about. So not everybody can, not everybody wants to participate, and you have different levels. We work with people to collect objects and archives, from the attic, family letters, family papers that become archives. So collecting with people, with individuals, is one way of doing participatory work. It's more challenging when you share the process of interpreting the past, because as you say, we have facts, but facts can be discussed, but you have knowledge and opinion, and they're not the same. Knowledge is based on a process, on evidence. Opinion is disconnected from evidence or is not following a specific methodology. And this is where I think public history matters, because we are not only sharing facts, we're not only sharing a final project, we're sharing how we do history. And this is something that is even more important, especially in the age of social media, where everything seems equal because everything is on social media. And sometimes it's opinion, and you don't see how people come to the conclusion that this is X or this is Y. And I think public history has this advantage of showing how we do history with people. We can disagree about facts, but there's also some methodology, like you need evidence to back up your argument. So we work with people, and people do history with us following this kind of methodology that is, again, not pure opinion. So it's very important, especially in the digital age, to show the process of how you come from evidence to interpretation, and that this you can disagree, but at least you have a process that you can discuss.
Of course. So I would say that this is also through the participation in your projects, you learn how to tell fake news apart as well. This is kind of some discussion we are having nowadays, is that our youngsters, our children are not able to tell facts from fiction. And actually through that kind of participation and analysis with your projects, they can also learn to understand what actually constitutes a fact, and be able to discuss this with others, I guess.
Ideally, yes. I mean, it's a big objective. I would agree. I think we are more modest in the sense that it starts with mentioning your evidence. We are very active on social media, and when people show or argue for things, we try to show them that we need evidence to support their argumentation. So if they have, for example, an argument about what was the kind of history in the 19th century in the local city, we ask them about pictures, about how they know what they know. So we do it together. So ultimately, this can help the fake news syndrome. But we're more modest and working on very specific aspects of doing history together. But you're right, it's connected to how we know what we know.
Of course, definitely. And you're kind of mediators in this, I would say. Because what I want to understand is, coming from my background, I've never had a chance to talk to a public historian. So for me, of course, sorry to say that, but the historian was always this person in somewhere kind of disconnected from my reality, trying to tell me some facts and present something that was related to my life or related to life of my, I don't know, compatriots. But somehow I was not always finding it difficult to find the link. So I love that idea of going to the public and trying to discuss this with us. But then I also fail to see the exact role you have in this. Because once again, let's say you're collecting, I know that you are also working on different projects about ash, for example. So you're collecting certain memories, certain objects, certain things. And then who is actually to decide, all right, this object we're going to have in our exhibition. So in the end, there is certain judgment applied. The historian is the one who is actually deciding using the knowledge and the approach that they have or not.
And not always. And I think you're right. There's sometimes there are different definitions of participation, and I think this also connect to the decision making. Who can tell the history, and who has the authority to tell the history about the past? We're not saying that historians are not useful, and historians have some expertise. And this is very important that when we collect objects, when people share their stories or their memories, we're not simply copying and pasting. I ask my students to not only check, sometimes memories are not true, and references are not true. So it's not something that we take for granted. So there's always some work. But I think the role of historians is, instead of telling the truth, to put things, images, collection, memories into context, and to compare sources, and to provide a more nuanced approach. Because most of people would have a very individual perspective or experience about the past, and that's great. But for other people, it maybe doesn't make sense. So the role of historians is also to create a framework in which single and individual memories have sense for other people. So it could be context, could be adding new sources, could be adding some interpretation. So historians are important, but they're not the only the only actor in the process of doing public history.
Absolutely, and I think it also fits in this context of telling the story of the minorities, of the people who didn't have the voice in the past, right? Because eventually history was always told by the powerful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and that's where partners may inform the historian. When you talk to people, historians may find out about things that are not in the archives, for example, because archives are made by powerful people, by archivists, but also city council, and not everything is in the archives. So if historians only go to the archives, they are also missing some part of the past. And talking to people, you may find out about secret sites or secret stories or different perspective about the past, perspective that were not in the archives, because archives are often about powerful people. They are underrepresented groups that you never hear in the archives. So that's when groups, partners, individuals can inform the historian and the history to find out more different perspective or different approach or different topics.
But then again, if you want to go very much back in the past, are you still able to practice public history? Because in the end, if you're going very much, 200, 300 years back, the sources you have are only going to be the scarce sources of the powerful.
Yeah, for the aspect of memories and participation, yes, because obviously if you want the participation from people and their memories, it has to be a living memory. So you more or less focus on the second half of the 20th century. But you have examples of public participation in archaeology. You have participatory digging. You have events in which people learn how to do archaeology with experts, and they do participatory archaeology. Or you can do participatory reenactment about the antiquity. You have archaeology, experimental archaeology, in which you can somehow reenact the past, learning through moves, through motions, or reenactment of scenes and stuff like that. So you're right about the participation through memories and objects. But there are examples of people helping in transcribing old manuscript. People learn how to transcribe certain old languages. For example, you have this project in Japan in which people help the scholars to transcribe old manuscript in Japanese. So this is something that you can do based on citizen science and the help of citizen scholars to help the research. There are ways to make history, even older history like 16th century or Middle Ages century, more participatory.
Participatory in the sense of people reenacting something, as you said. So it kind of reminds me of the science museums, especially the children part, right? Where you can touch and hit and whatever. And through that you learn.
Yes, that could be a way for people to engage with objects. Something that you mentioned, that when you learn history, you were not touched by the history that your teacher was telling you. So it's a way for people to engage with objects, engage with the history that touches them. So it's a way to connect people and the sources, the archives, or simply the history that is done in museums or in films or and so on, or games.
Okay, makes sense. I want to talk a little bit more about the details of your work here in Luxembourg and all the different projects you focus on. But before we do that, as you know, there is always part in this podcast where we ask one pub quiz style question. So I know you prepared something for our listeners. So could you please tell us what it is?
Yes. So the pub quiz question is, what does C2DH stand for?
Okay, very quick and neat question. So we will, as usual, reveal the answer at the very end. So I will ask you to tell us a little bit more about that later on. But for now, let's focus more on the details, as I said. So I know you are behind the facts. So public history as the new citizen science of the past. Sounds very serious. What is it exactly?
It's based on the assumption that we can make history more participatory, and that the concept of citizen science, so citizen scientists, citizens helping to do research, we want to apply this methodology to the whole concept of history. So making history more participatory, not only by people transcribing documents, not only by people helping collecting objects, but by people, citizens, doing history with us, with museums, with universities. So we try to create framework in which everybody can participate and do something for the whole process. Again, not everybody can be an historian, not everybody can do the whole process, but we try to create steps that people can help with. So taking part of a bigger project of public history based on this citizen science that develop very much with the digital turn. This is something that has been done through farms, digital farms, or digital communication. So we want to use that to make history more participatory, not only online, but also in physical, in workshops, in exhibitions, to make people actors and not only passive audience of the process.
So you mentioned museums. Will that be more focused on the spaces such as museums and universities, or are you also planning to go really out to the public and let's say have an exhibition in a square somewhere where you can enter and participate?
Both. We partner with different museums in Luxembourg, in Belgium, in Italy, in which we try to help them develop their participatory practices. For example, there is this exhibition in Italy in the M9 Museum, which is about the history of 20th century Italy. And they have an exhibition about food. And we partner with them to develop participatory practice online for people to help collect recipes or to reenact some historical recipe based on family history that will be part of their exhibition. So people input being directly in the museum. But it can also be a museum outside a museum. We have a project in Esch in which we're going to collect 50 objects, family objects, could be anything, could be a piece of clothing, could be a mining tool, could be a lamp. And those 50 objects will be chosen by the local inhabitants and will lead to an exhibition next September in a shop. So not in a museum, but in an empty shop that we're going to have in Rue de l'Alzette, where the 50 objects will be exhibited on display. And it's going to be participatory in the sense that the objects come from the local inhabitants. So they bring us their objects or they send pictures of the objects. The objects will be selected by people. We're going to have a vote online, and people will vote for the 50 best objects. And we're going to have a group of citizen curators, people, non-professional historians, who's going to help us to write the text for the objects or to interpret the objects and to also mount the exhibition. So we can have this participatory practice in which we have objects that tell different stories about the history of Esch. Could be mining, of course, but it could be more intimate stories.
Are you still collecting the objects?
Yes, we started a few months ago, and it's a process in progress. So we have objects every month, and I'm sure we'll have more than 50 objects. So the idea is also for people to choose what fits best their views of their history.
But this is a very difficult task, actually, from not the collection perspective, but the fact that you're really involving people in all the possible steps of the process. I mean, I'm a little bit of an introvert. So once I think of all the communication you have to do and this mediation and emotions that will be involved in this, because we're talking about history, personal, local histories of people who will probably argue, disagree, will have different opinions, and you somehow have to manage to. It's more about managing the space and the public rather than just like saying, okay, I think this way. This is very difficult.
Exactly, the challenge, and we'll see that the idea is also to see what can work and what is still challenging. So it's very much a work in progress. But the idea is exactly this: to build a framework in which multiple voices, including the voices of historians, can be heard and can be present in the exhibition. The challenge is that we have no idea what it's going to look like because we don't have the objects yet. And that's the point. We're not deciding, this is going to look like this. We want like 20 objects about mining. It could be very much like most of the objects are about celebration or about parades or about scout and association. We don't know. And that's the beauty of, opening up the process to people.
Of course, definitely. But also in such a country as Luxembourg, the perspectives are so numerous. And this is even more interesting because you really don't know where it's going to lead you. Because of course, it might be also depends on the people who are going to participate. That's also a bit of a risk because I would assume that most probably you will get more response from the local historian, amateur historian, if I can say amateur in this case. So people who are really passionate about the place, and most probably the people who are passionate will be rooted way more than those who came and went and whose history is also very important for Esch.
Yes, you're right, and it's not perfect, and the aspect of representation is always something to discuss. Who's gonna be represented? But it's still better than one person only deciding what the narrative should be. And there are processes of remediation about reaching out people that maybe are not on social media or are not willing to go to a workshop. So we've decided to also go to some individuals who are, maybe they are a bit too old to come to our workshop, and maybe they don't want to talk in front of people. So now we have these one-on-one meetings, sort of interviews in which people tell us about their family histories and why those objects or why those sites in the city matter to them. So also we try to have different frameworks in which people come to us, and we try to come to some people. It's not perfect, but we try to be as inclusive as possible.
Absolutely, and that also leads to this whole idea of the symposium that you've just finished yesterday and 2 days ago, because we're talking, of course, pre-recording everything. The whole idea of navigating multiple historical narratives, right? So this ability to find the people to tell the story, but then also going through the identity, the memory, personal stories, all these things together, right? So how did the symposium go? Were you surprised by any facts, or you were more or less expecting what the presentations will be about?
Well, it went very well in the sense that it's an open question, right? It's not, when you open the field to participation, obviously you're going to have multiple views, multiple perspective, and sometimes those perspective, those interpretation conflict, right? And that's by definition what's going to happen. So the idea is to work on framework that allows some conflicting interpretation and still have some coherence. That's a challenge, and but that's a question. That's not an answer. So it's open ended, and people from the field of museums, people from the field of education participated in the symposium. People from the field of literature, of media, came to the picture because that's a question that goes beyond history. It goes way beyond history. So this was a very interdisciplinary discussion with people from societies like Colombia or Northern Ireland, where the past is very much a topic of heated discussion. Right? So we are learning from them. We work with them to try to have these inclusive narratives and also for conflicting interpretation because people may disagree about the past. There may be a history of the Second World War, but people may have different perspective. And also during the war, people had different perspective about the war. It doesn't change the history, but people may have different interpretation, different perspective. Our role as historians is always to make sure that we are talking about evidence and we're talking about the past. But the past may have different perspective, and sometimes we need to accept that the experience of the war was different in the countryside, in France, or in the cities, or in England, and there's not only one narrative. And this is something we should also explain to people on social media and online. There's not only one history; you have multiple narratives. And it's not necessarily, true or not true. Sometimes it's more complex than that.
Absolutely. I come from Poland, and I think that's a very good example as a country for historical narrative, especially nowadays, not getting into details. But of course, the governments also want to influence that narrative, museums included, right? And there are those situations when the curators are trying to actually present something in a nuanced way. But then again, right, there are people who own the facts, if you want. The same for historical textbooks. It's something very present and very much conflicting in many places. Just like the fact that coming from that country, when I learned history at school, it was obviously Poland centric. And the map was not centered on Poland, but of course we are looking from that perspective. And my husband is Italian, so I love the discussions we have about those perspectives of, where the world started, let's say, and how it twisted. Because I always tell him, yes, in European Union right now, there are more countries and we also have that share, but still this is part of it. And it's just Europe and going, of course, beyond, as you said, Colombia, other places. I mean, this is a narrative that is ongoing and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the example of the Museum of the Second World War in Poland or...
Exactly. That's what I meant for the Museum of the Second World War. That's a long story in Poland, I would say, right? So yes, we see it all the time. Coming back to Luxembourg. Okay, so let's leave Poland aside because we are in Luxembourg and I want to talk about Luxembourg. Just one last thing before we reveal our pub quiz question. I know you also work on a Facebook group. So historian in a Facebook group. The group is called Flashback.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, right? In case you're looking for it, it's FL'', right? Like the city back. And what is it about? You discuss with people. It's again this kind of participatory group where people can share their experiences.
Yes, I mean it's a Facebook group about Esh. So we played on the word like flashback, and the idea is first to talk about history on social media and not only telling the history, but how we do history, how history is done, the relation with sources. You need sources, you interpret sources, you discuss, you interpret. So to open the process of how we do history, so to be on social media, because I also think that it's very important for historians as well to be on social media. you have a lot of discourses about the past on social media, but actually very few historical narrative, because it's very difficult to do history on social media, and the space is occupied by most of people who talk loud, who are followers. It's not always history. So we also want to be present on social media. And it is also a way to do history with people. We go back to public history. It is very much built as a participatory process. People help us doing history. So we do a post about, for example, the swimming pool. We're going to have one post next week about the old swimming pool, which used to be a basin of the old factory. And people help us with pictures, with anecdotes. So they enrich the history that we start. So after the post, it's no longer our history; it's their history too. So they discuss, they propose, and they got family history objects, stories about the swimming pool, which is not like, it's still there, but it's not open. So we try to use Facebook as a collaborative. It's a community, it's a group, a collaborative way of doing history with anecdotes, stories, and family pictures are great because they tell us a lot about history of the city. So that was the original aim of doing history on social media, on Facebook. I know a lot of historians do not like social, and people do not like social media, and they don't think we can do history on social media. I disagree, and I think this is something we should be using more often.
Absolutely. I noticed there was one post on that group of some men who was saying it's the first group I actually joined on Facebook. And I'm so excited because now I can talk about this and this, about the local history and Ash. So it's definitely, you're also convincing these people who kind of course, also, as you're saying, historians are not excited about social media, but also the public that is treating social media maybe, I don't know, for pictures of cats, right? Whatever else, but not this discourse that is inclusive and participatory and lets us discover something that is important for us locally. So that's always great. Definitely. So good luck with that. I'll be definitely checking it out more often.
Facebook is also, if you compare to other social media, it's also great because you don't only have pictures, but you have comments and discussion. Because most of the time on Facebook, you have one picture and people like it or they share it, but that's it. What we try to do is to have a forum, a discussion about pictures. We never have pictures, sold pictures. We try to have discussion about those pictures. What do they tell us? Where is it coming from? How can we compare these pictures with other sources? So it's not only liking and sharing, which is one of the drawbacks of social media, but it's also discussing what you have on social media.
Absolutely. And it's giving the space because, if you were to move it to Twitter, let's say, I don't think you can do history on Twitter. I mean, it's supposed to be short and controversial so that everybody shares it, right? It's not, of course, I mean, in certain ways you can share something longer somewhere else, but that's difficult. I can see you're saying kind of like a no with your head. You disagree with me?
I would. I think there are ways to do history on Twitter through thread, because you have step-by-step process on Twitter that can be super useful, because as an historian, you could, do a thread about how you come to that result and, divide into steps. So you have this source, this is I compare that source with this, you have the context. And so that could also be done. It may be more difficult, but that's something that's been done by some historians and sometimes very successfully.
I will be checking on Twitter how you're doing that, so I'll learn something as well. And then I will give you feedback if I think still that it's not possible. When it comes to the pub quiz style question, could you tell us what the answer is? So if we were to repeat the question was, what is historisch? So can you tell us what is that?
So historisch is the name that we came up with to gather all our project about Esch. Because the challenge in Luxembourg and in Esch is that you have so many languages. It's a country when you have three official languages. English is important. Portuguese is very important. 1/3 of the population in Esch speaks Portuguese. So what name do you choose for your project? A name that could work in different languages. So we came up with historisch because it has a meaning in different languages. And it means that we're going to do the history of Esch, and Historisch is the adjective, and that gathers the exhibition with 50 objects of Esch. But it's also about a map of interviews of people who choose site in Esch and tell us their history of Esch. And so it gathers all those projects, including the final project, which is a mural, a historical fresco. So we're going to have one wall in Esch in which the public, with historians and the artists, decide how to represent the past of the city. So it's going to be a fresco, it's historical, it's about Esch, and everything is part of what we call Historisch, that is tried to be as inclusive as possible in different languages.
And this is all going to happen in 2022, right? Because of the Capital of Culture events.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so I'm thinking about moving to Esch right now, not to miss all the different events that are happening, because there's a lot going on. I'm very excited about that, because I hope that this whole idea of Capital of Culture always helps with the development. And Esch is such an amazing place from different perspectives, as you said, history, but also, the buildings right now. It's developing so fast, and I'm really, really happy that we got this Capital of Culture thing going, because through that, for sure, there will be more cooperations and more ideas coming through, and hopefully that's going to be just a start for others to follow. And I think that in that part as well, in this historic projects, there'll be something about food, if I remember well, right? There'll be some recipes too, because you mentioned Italy. So what about local food?
Yes, we believe that food is a fantastic medium to talk about history, about family history. Going back to your teachers, we want to make history that engage with people. And the way people are engaged by history is when history touches them. And food, everyday life, things that people do every day that they can relate to are important for us to work with them. And food is a wonderful medium. And through food, you can talk about very complex and super interesting topic like migration. I mean, Hesh is a city built on immigration from the late 19th century, because of the workers in industry in Esch. And through food, you can talk about the Italian migration and how Italian food and recipes and Italian community are still very much present in the city of Esch. We saw that last year with the football championship, with a lot of people supporting the Italian team. So through food, we're going to have some dinners in which we talk about the past. We have this historical recipe that people help us with, sending us some recipes from immigration, for example, but other topics, the history of women, the history of the environment. So we're going to reenact some historical recipes and talk about associated historical topics. So we're going to do that later in 2022 in small dinners and small banquets in which we talk through food about the different histories of the city of Esch-sur-Alzette.
Okay, so the only thing that remains is to ask where people can find more information. Where would you lead them to know more, or what should they be checking to know where to participate?
If they're on social media, on Facebook, they can join our group, which is called Flashback. We also have a web page which is called Historisch. So if they go on Google and they write Historisch and Luxembourg, they will find us. And soon we will have a website where people can not only contact us, but send us pictures of objects or record their own stories for our map. So the website is planned to be up and running at the beginning of 2022. And that will be a way for us to collect testimonies, to collect objects, and for people to have a voice in the history that we all going to present in the different projects.
Okay, so I'm sure that once it's live, I'm going to share that on all my social media accounts as well, so people can do that. Thank you very much for today. Professor Thomas Cauvin was our guest.
Thank you, Anna. It was very much my pleasure.
So I have to admit I had some kind of a flashback today at the very end of this interview because I remembered being at university and getting it wrong, saying doctor instead of professor. Oh my, that could end up with repeating a test or an exam. So I was very happy that it was not the case here. It was just an interview and I kind of only made Professor Thomas Cauvin laugh rather than find any other repercussions for me. Anyway, this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the show, enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, you want to connect with us with Silax, just follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, LinkedIn, or just write me an email. I'll be very happy to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from, if it's Luxembourg, why you're listening, what you would like to hear more, who I should talk to. Any suggestions are always welcome. This was Silax, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.